For lecture 13, we're going to talk about global issues. There'll be several different things that we consider global. The definition of that will come up, but generally, you should think of global as having two meanings. Number one, global in space, that is world level issues. Number two, global in time, that is historically and out to the future. So there's a number of issues along these lines we've already discussed in class. One that's with respect to time and space is the environment. So environmental issues, certainly a global issue of concern, for instance, with climate change. And we discussed environmental ethics in the last lecture. In this lecture, we're going to consider a number of different issues. So things that will have worldwide impact. Most people feel the world is shrinking in a sense due to two things. Number one, telecommunications, internet, for instance, cell phones. And then it's also trade. That makes it feel like the world is shrinking. So long time periods, and engineers are just learning about that. And then in global issues, you often run into cross-cultural issues, multinational issues. The question arises, for many of you, will you get into international engineering? And the answer to that is, or international business, the answer is probably you will. Many of your companies are already doing international business. It's good for you to understand what's going on. And one of the issues there is how to become cross-cultural. That's a huge challenge. It's not easy to understand, let's say, different ways of doing engineering around the world. Okay, the U.S. approach is one approach, but there's many others. So what is the relevance to engineering? It's very important to have broad thinking in the design process, if for no other reason to help your company make money, so that you make culturally appropriate technologies. Engineering really is naturally cross-cultural. If you look around you, you see people from all over the world, from India or China, for instance, Latin America, and so forth. And so engineering's always had that characteristic of being international. The other thing that's happening is globalization. That is probably going to be the biggest thing that affects you in your career is globalization and what it's going to do to competition for engineering. In other words, you're going to more and more be competing with engineers from around the world. And that means in all respects, in technology designs, but also on the tough stuff like salary level. If they're willing to do it at half the cost and they do a better job than you, you're going to be worrying about getting a job. Okay? So its impact of this globalization on the engineering profession is really unfolding. So first international issue is multinational corporations. Some of you will go work for multinational corporations. Those are corporations that sell a bulk of their products, for instance, abroad, or ones that have divisions all over the world. And when you do that, you're confronted with the challenge of the technology transfer one. That is moving technology to a new location and implementing it there, hardware or technique or process, manufacturing process, for instance. So the book says that engineers need to be cross-cultural experimenters, okay? One idea along these lines is the notion of appropriate technology. That is essentially culturally appropriate technology. You try to create the most suitable technology. Sometimes it's not the highest technology. Sometimes it might be lower tech. And you try to transfer those technologies around the world, finding the essential best approach for the technology. If you think about the spread of technology, over the last 10 years, the most prevalent spread has not been computers, actually. It's been the cell phone. Right now, there's over 6 billion people in the world with a cell phone subscription. That's 7.1 billion people. So it's quite incredible. People value the ability to communicate a lot with friends and family, but also call and find market prices before they take their product to market, etc. So the cell phone has incredible spread for technology. Some people would call it an appropriate technology. Characteristics of appropriate technology are ones that are not too big, you start small. Ones that don't require too many technical or managerial skills. We'll talk in a minute about the Bhopal disaster and what happened when there was this transfer of technology to India, the disaster there. Materials and energy, the availability and cost. In terms of the physical environment, it can cope not just with the environment in the United States, but maybe also deserts or extreme humidity in the tropics, salinity, water, etc. It's acceptable to the end users, not only acceptable but desirable, like something like a cell phone. And it's sustainable in terms of the environment and has a positive impact on local jobs. Okay. So the Bhopal disaster, U.S.-based company Union Carbide, and is a multinational corporation. It operated in 37 different countries. And December 3rd, 1984, a leak and overheating in a storage tank in Bhopal, India, occurred at one of their sites. The tank contained, let's just call it mick, a toxic ingredient used in pesticides. So the problem with mick is it burns any moist part of the body. It'll scald your throat, nasal passages, it'll blind your eyes, and destroy your lungs. Okay? So what happened when this leak started is within an hour it exploded into a gush. I sent 40 tons of mick into the atmosphere. This was the worst industrial accident in history. Okay, so the problem is nobody knows how many people died. They say about 500,000 persons were exposed to this. Within a few days, up to 3,000 deaths due to this accident. It's sort of unbelievable. These are the conservative estimates. The more liberal ones put that far higher. There's 10,000 people that were personally disabled. 100 to 200,000 were injured. And again, all these figures are disputed. But these are the conservative estimates. 10 years later, there had been 12,000 death claims and $70,000 in personal injury claims. So in 2001, 1984 this happened. It took till 2001 after all the lawyers and everybody dealt with this. The victims and the families received compensation from Union Carbide of $600 apiece. Okay. And there were still outstanding claims in 2003. Think about the magnitude of this. Just take take two numbers there. 3,000 deaths. That's the order of 9/11, right? I think it was 3,200 died due to 9/11. Look at 10,000 personally disabled. Wow. These are big numbers. This is a terrible thing. So let's look at some of the causes for the disaster. First of all, there were extremely lax safety procedures. There were gross judgment errors by local plant operators. Okay, this is like a chemical process control plant. There's controversy over this. There may have been some sabotage with unintended consequences, but it seems that people feel that that's not what led to the disaster. It was like a coincident event that may have exacerbated the problem. So there was clearly a greater sensitivity of the social factors needed in transferring this chemical technology. It would have been lessened the effect of the disaster if they'd used smaller tanks to store mick. When Union Carbide has a plant in France, they require them to store things in smaller tanks because they know there could be a problem like this. So the government of India required Bhopal to be operated entirely by Indian workers. And this led to some problems. Union Carbide in the beginning spent a lot of time training Indian workers. They initially had U.S. engineers make site visits for safety inspection. But in '82, the financial pressures led Union Carbide to relinquish the supervision of safety at Bhopal to the Indian engineers. This led to a problem because in the following 2 years, safety practices eroded. There was a higher turnover of employees. So you, as an engineer from Union Carbide, are going there and trying to make sure people are trained, doing this right because you know the dangers real well. And then the people that you train move on to another job. Okay? So you need there was a failure to properly train the new employees while they did hands off after a while. And there was low technical preparedness of the local labor pool, which I'm sure that Union Carbide knew. So the other problem was they moved from US safety standards to lower Indian standards. And of course, I'm sure they saved a lot of money doing that. By '84, there was extreme hazards, and even smaller ones on. So the lesson is be very careful in dealing with the transfer of dangerous technologies out of the country. It takes years of diligence and financial commitment that your company may not be able to uphold. Next issue, sweatshops. So we hear this term. These are manufacturing sites in the developing world that engineers help set up and operate. A lot of companies from the US set up sweatshops, okay? They may not start out intending for that to be the case, but they get, let's say you're a company, you want to manufacture a product, you put out a call for bids from around the world, different groups come in and propose to run it, and you take the lowest bid, okay? So that's the so-called race to the bottom, and the problem is the people that do the bidding, the business people that help run these then, are not ensuring a variety of things, such as safety standards and working conditions can be horrendous, and environmental standards, there can be all kinds of dumping that's going on, etc. They may not allow unions and may forcibly disallow them via local police that are in cahoots with the local elite. They may not get a fair wage. That's a very controversial issue, what a fair wage is. So the problem is, can you improve all these? Well, it's complicated because you as an engineer set this up in some situations. If you adhere to these safety standards, whose standards do you adhere to? The ones here or there? Typically it's there because it's easier to do. Okay, you don't have to meet OSHA or anything like that. Environmental standards, can you just dump it out the back door? Yeah, that's what's going on. And so on. So the problem is if you start pinning these issues down, doing things properly, then it drives the cost for operation up, okay? And then this place can go out of business and not employ as many people. A lot of times, from my reading, sweatshops are actually incredibly valuable to local people because they get a consistent, maybe not a well-paying job, but they get stable employment and for a longer period of time. And it's usually better than what they would get via selling vegetables or something like this. So, you gotta look by whose standards. You may not like we have sweatshops, but who makes the decision? Is it the local people that need those jobs? And so forth. If you try to fix the problem, you're gonna drive up prices and then create unemployment. This creates quite a quandary for you. The trick, I think, in this, to work cross-culturally in this situation, is to try to do some really inventive engineering so that you can keep costs down and yet not subject people to incredible unsafe conditions and destroy the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So these create real big engineering challenges because there's big human side to the whole thing and everything else, okay? Okay, any questions or comments about sweatshops? Okay, next. So what are our moral responsibilities to global scale? So is it like we were just saying, if you're in another country, can you just follow their safety procedures or their environmental regulations or lack of their regulations? Sometimes they may have regulations, but they may not be enforced. Okay, this is called ethical relativism. So it can excuse horrors and safety in the environment. The problem is ethical absolutism, that is there's one set of rules, you just adhere to all the rules in the US, is probably not going to work either because you're going to price yourself out of the market if you do that internationally. Another issue that arises is the question of whether engineering ethics is the same everywhere. It used to be thought in the US that books like ours, Martin Schinzinger book, represents a worldwide standard for engineering ethics. And if you start studying it for a while, that is just not true. There's different ideas in different countries. I read this paper recently about Japan. They do not have a concept of professional. Don't even have the concept. If you don't have, we sort of start from that. We already have a notion of professional, okay, and we can start from that as a basis in the start of class. We can talk about professionalism, ethics, blah, blah, blah. All right, if you don't even have professionalism to rest on, what can you do? They also don't have this idea of moral autonomy. I emphasize, we're a highly individualistic society, so we emphasize your ability to stand for your own moral beliefs and argue those beliefs as a professional. I mean, it's one of the things I've emphasized with us. In Japan, they don't believe in that idea. All right? So, well, you know, I taught this subject in El Salvador 2 summers ago. It's pretty fascinating to do a cross-cultural engineering ethics education. They have some different views on cases, you know, with respect to bribery and nepotism. They have relatively high standards, but they start asking questions that I would never hear in a class like this. For instance, with respect to bribery, they would say, well, maybe it's okay to take bribes if you're not making that much money. Or nepotism, it's not all right for the government to happen in the government, but maybe in a company it's okay. Okay, so there are different views. And I'm not saying what's right or wrong, that's just the way they view it. So how do we cope with this ethical pluralism and how people feel? What I have fun talking about with people when I go travel internationally is these issues. I like to ask them a question. How do you feel about this? You know, it's different here, it's different there. Okay. Also, what we in the United States say is a high degree of safety may not be, it may be different, the perception of a high degree of safety in a different country. And who's to say who's right or wrong? I mean, our standards all were developed via years and years of lots of mistakes and people getting hurt. That's where it all came from. Okay. So you might say, wait a minute, we need to all in the world agree on something here. And I would say that's extremely problematic. You might say, well, let's just go to human rights. We can at least agree on that. Now, you can go to the UN Declaration on Human Rights. It's 43 rights. I chose something shorter because it makes the point. This is a listing of human rights. So if this is international set of human rights, you would think that we could have some agreement around the world. Well, let's even find out if all the Americans agree with this, or let's see if the U.S. has even followed any of these human rights in those respective. So, right to freedom of physical movement. That's a complicated one. So I'm not even sure what it means. I mean, within the United States, you can move around, you know, you cross the border from Ohio to Indiana, nobody houses you, whatever. Or does it mean between Mexico and the U.S.? Right? Or U.S. and Mexico. Not clear. Most people would say that it doesn't include such cases like that. Right to ownership of property. We do have that in the United States, right? A right to ownership of property. In the past, that's been disputed by communism, and Karl Marx basically said that communism is the proposal to abandon all rights to private property. That's his basic statement. Okay, so that's been in dispute in the past. Right to freedom from torture. We don't have that in the United States. We certainly don't. When you look at what we've had in the country the past 10 years. Okay? Right to a fair trial. That's complicated, right? I mean, most people, a lot of people think there's a right, we do have a right to fair trial, we get fair trials in the United States, but I think you can consider cases where that might not be the case. Right to non-discriminatory treatment. We might have a right to it, but it's happening all the time, right? We have all kinds of discriminatory treatment. Right to physical security. Well, yeah, we do have that right. Freedom of speech and association. That's pretty well protected in this country. Right to a minimal education. Pretty well protected. Right to political participation, pretty well protected. Rights to subsistence. Subsistence means food, drink, the real basic issues. Do we have a right to that? Well, there's one thing having a right to it and whether it's being sustained. I think you could argue, this is a difficult one because subsistence is pretty, you'd have to pin it down more carefully. But some people, advocates for the homeless, for instance, in the United States, would say that this isn't properly being fulfilled, okay? If we find this mix of meeting such rights here in the United States, you'll find the same thing in Europe. You find it all over the world, okay? So we can't even agree, really, in practice, on a set of rights. We may agree to it, but in practice, these things often don't happen. So how in the world do we agree on rules for safe engagement of people with technology in manufacturing sites, for safety standards, environmental standards? It's a mess, okay? It is a mess. One example here is women engineers' rights and non-discrimination. This is a tough issue. When I was in El Salvador, I got into two a man and a woman engineers got in an argument over some of these issues. I mean, my impression there is that the women engineers are not given much respect compared to men, and I think they're in a worse off situation from what I can tell compared to women here. It's hard for me to judge that though from one encounter, but it certainly looked that way. So corporations. So, will corporations promote the common good, as it's called sometimes? Respect human rights in every country. A lot of people would say they have not. And the utilitarianism perspective is the business to benefit the host country benefits the company. So a lot of people push companies to start viewing themselves when they're in another country, to view themselves like they're in Columbus and helping the neighbors out, the community, that should do the same thing there. Okay? And some companies do a fantastic job at that, in fact. So by promoting just institutions policies. So the question is, what is a fair wage? So you give a wage as in the home country, the host country, which can be quite low. You give a low wage that's just a little bit above the local average salary, you'll get employees, right? And then it comes out in the news that that's what you're paying, and people will call you an exploiter, right? You're gonna have a hard time. So do you pay them as we pay them in the US? No, probably not. That'd be very high by local standards. Now, you gotta be careful when you say that. I think when you find out the cost of living in international locations, including developing countries, it's pretty shocking how high the cost of living is sometimes. Sometimes people think, well, those poor people over there, they don't have a high cost of living, so really that's a lot of money they're making at, $1.25 a day or something. And that's absurd. That's not the case. Okay, so this is, some people say it should be somewhere in between these two extremes. It should be what's called a living wage. Now, a living wage is complicated because it depends on how many breadwinners are in the family, how many kids there are, etc. But this is what a lot of people, when it comes to human rights, press for is a living wage. Okay. I talked about the example of nepotism a little bit. So the globalization of engineering that you're going to be confronting. One of my past students from a number of years ago, he's in charge of, at Motorola, he's in charge of one phone. He has a hardware group in Singapore, his software group in India, and there's one engineer in the US, him, is running this show, and they produce the whole thing, everything, okay? Why not just eliminate the US guy altogether? So you are going to be confronted with that kind of competition in the future, and I'd say it's pretty scary. Now, of course, there's been offshore IT growth over the past 15 years, with India in particular standing out. But some of that's come back to the US too, because there's been problems. But nonetheless, ask yourself this question: what of your jobs in electrical engineering can be outsourced? Okay. And that's pretty scary. The answer is pretty scary because a lot of what we do could be outsourced. And we can work over the internet. Okay, one of our own creations is going to kill us. But if you think about it, there are a number of advantages you have with being from the U.S. In engineering, when people have studied this, the competitive advantage of the U.S. engineer, it's a lot, usually in the top 5 or whatever, the issue of creativity is brought up. That we need to promote creativity and try to be creative. Now, I've seen that be the case. I find Americans in my own working with Americans compared to, I work with people from all over the world as grad students. Americans are incredibly creative. Okay? Part of that is the individualism. Part of it's the lack of respect for authority sometimes, and the willingness to question authority, sort of think outside the box. So you have to have something in your job. I think you should be thinking about, well, what's my advantage? What's my competitive advantage? I think you better think very carefully about that. So what's it going to affect? Of course, it's going to affect salary. Okay, we'll come to that more because you're going to compete with other countries. There's a lot of people willing to do the job you're going to do for a lot less money, right? That's just the fact of life. I mean, and one thing that's really great about traveling internationally is meeting smart people. There's a lot of smart people in the world. I mean, you shouldn't think, oh, we're smarter. No, tons of talent. Okay. If we have a better global awareness that can work around the world, we're likely to do better. Of course, we need technical competence, creativity, language skills, professionalism. Okay. If you want to read a good book along these lines, Thomas Friedman's "The World is Flat" is an interesting read. Globalization's impact on engineers' unions. What will be the impact of globalization on the creation of engineers' unions? So, should engineers unionize and strike? This is complicated because some people would say, oh, it's not professional to strike. Medical doctors never strike. We should be professionals like them and never strike. Well, and lawyers too. They don't strike. Okay? But, we have a sort of responsibility to demand to be treated fairly, okay? And the question about whether to unionize has been coming up. It seems to me more and more, at least I'm hearing about it more and more. Is there anybody here that found out at their company that there's an engineers union? Please show your hand. None. I'm not seeing anybody. Yeah, it's still pretty rare. But it seems to me that this issue is going to come up if we start doing more global competition and our salaries start coming down due to the global competition. We may start striking against our own companies, as is common with labor. Next global issue, computer ethics and the internet. Of course, computers are the technological backbone of the society, and really it's hard to see the eventual impact of computers, and so the ethics are evolving. Of course, some of the issues with the internet, there's lots of issues with internet and free speech. It's brought about a lot more free speech around the world and has had a positive impact in a number of places on the development of democracy. So there's been some really positive things that way. But there's the other side of the internet, of course. The porn problem, okay? You can argue about whether porn's okay or not. That's your own business to argue with your friends about that. But the problem is it gets really extreme. What about child pornography? I think most people would feel that's really a bad thing, okay? Ones where there's violent portrayal and degrading portrayals of women are really bad. And so the problem is the internet's made all of this accessible. We talked earlier about this issue of porn in the workplace. The problem with free speech, of course, is there's people who do hate speech, okay? Racist, hate groups, and so forth. There's a question of how to control some of this, and it is difficult. The government approach with controls was the Children's Internet Protection Act 2001's. Libraries that get federal funds have to use filters to block porn. And then bottom-up controls, well, parents' filters, okay? But it's basically, I think you know it's very, very difficult to control. As a parent, I have a very hard time with this issue because in reality, if I start blocking everything but my selected website for my child, well, how long am I going to sit there and, how do I handle Google? And and they're doing a homework assignment for class, okay, I got to let them do it. I can't restrict the sites. So it's a very difficult issue. And then there's a lot of people that don't want much control over internet content anyway. Since it's the defender of freedom, equality, and opportunity, they say. And so you can understand why people get upset if they put any controls on that. But and you can tell by getting on the internet there's not much control. So problems with computers. Job elimination, some people say. They lead to elimination of jobs. Customer relations. You should make it easy for consumers to catch and correct errors. Stock trading. Can be automated with computers, and you have to ensure that it's fair for all. Military weapons, we'll talk about that. The automation of war. When you think about it, that's what a drone is all about. It's the automation of war. Abuse. There's all kinds of abuse, embezzlement, theft, hacking, etc. Computer crooks tend to be intelligent and view their exploits as like challenges. So engineers have to envision not only the intended context for the computer we use, but likely abuses. So you have to protect against hackers. I mean, some of you will get into this in your job place as an electrical engineer, more on the software side. Hardware, though, is protected by patent laws. But of course, when it comes to overseas, there's all kinds of breaking of patents. Software is often copyrighted, but there's lots of abuse and breaking patents on software. Privacy. So inappropriate access to records and hackers that get into those. You hear it in the news all the time, right? So some people say that all information should be freely accessible. But there are legitimate limits on access to information. Individual privacy, for instance, your medical or records or your financial records. So we have a freedom in a capitalist society to protect ourselves from that as a company too. Here's one case that's been popular over the last few years, is Edward Snowden. So Edward was at the National Security Agency, and it's monitored by the executive and legislative branches and the CIA. They do surveillance of phone cameras and internet. So the question is what is an engineer's right, responsibility, or obligation to whistleblow on privacy issues? No. We'll talk about Edward Snowden. He was not an engineer, right? He wasn't even a computer scientist. So question you could ask is the surveillance really for national security reasons? Actually, for criminal reasons, discrimination, political reasons, or for advertising, helping healthcare, insurance, credit organizations admit or reject clients, or other. So how is the information really being used? Is it just used by the government, or do they send the information to somebody else? What is a serious violation of privacy? Google does it every day. I mean, if you compare the volume of what Google gets on each of us to what the government organizations are doing, and it's not clear to me who's getting more. I mean, Google's all over you, right? I mean, they have incredible records on us. What other methods are there to protect the country? Why should we be doing all this surveillance? Okay, is this really helpful? The government claims it is. Have the surveillance methods been successful? Well, the government says they've saved people, put bad guys in jail or deported them and stopped attacks, but some would question that. Should you first work within the organization before the whistleblower? So the question here is, what did Edward Snowden do before he went outside the organizations? Certainly you should start within the organizations. Do you really have the expertise to evaluate the broad issue and trade-offs involved if many other elected individuals are doing the same thing? there's all kinds of oversight in these programs, congressional, presidential, etc. Okay, including the organizations themselves. Edward Snowden has no degree in computer science. He doesn't have a lot of background. Okay, this looked wrong to him, and he stood up for what he felt was wrong. Okay, and I have not been able to uncover how much internal complaining he did before he went public. I've researched this, haven't been successful. But nobody is saying that he was writing memos, documenting, saying what was wrong. He didn't seem to be doing that. He seemed to just blow the whistle. Okay? So you could question, there's good reason to question what he did just based on those grounds. Just procedurally, it's good reason to question him based on his expertise. Okay? But at the same time, this is really controversial in this country. I mean, it seems to be about half and half support or opposed to this guy. And he brought out a very difficult issue. Okay, what are you willing to give up in terms of your privacy in order to get security? That's the fundamental issue, right? That's the fundamental. So, and he brought the argument to the forefront. You can be credited for that. Right or wrong, whether he did it right or wrong. Anybody want to comment about Edward Snowden? He's faded from the news a little bit lately.
So he did actually bring it up several times internally. When he was employed by the U.S. government, he brought it up with general counsel a few times. That has been covered by the media, and they have confirmed it.
Okay, good.
Later, as a contractor, he brought it up with his company, and they dismissed his claims.
I see. So he was trying. Well, good for him. I mean, that's the right thing to do, of course. I'm curious. Let's do a little survey. How many people think he did the wrong thing? Raise your hand. How many people think he did the right thing? Interesting. Would anybody like to comment? Yeah.
He has maybe 5 years in national security, and he was never a high-level strategic thinker. He was an IT guy working for a couple of agencies. The only people who can actually see, and even most people can't, the only ones who have the potential wherewithal to say what could happen from exposing the things he exposed are the guys who have been in the national security environment for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and have been running it. You should look at what the CIA or the former director of the NSA says about what he released. He has no idea the number of lives that he put at risk by revealing these things.
This is a difficult issue. This questioning his expertise, I think, is from my reading about him, the right thing to do. To question his ability, whether he, this voting class, is one thing, and this is why it's controversial. I mean, there's some percentage that support what he did. But yeah, I mean, if he didn't have the expertise to do it, should it have been done? It's an extremely complicated issue, right? I mean, when it comes right down to it, yes.
Well, I don't think it should be really surprising that the NSA was doing what they were doing. Ever since the very beginning of cryptography research started in America, they tried to control that as well. So I don't really find it that surprising that they're doing it. In terms of Edward, the only thing that surprised me about it is that he had such strong beliefs, yet he was working with the NSA.
Yeah.
To me, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, that's true. Anybody else like to comment?
Going back to what Dan said, he did not reveal any details about ongoing missions. He revealed only details about domestic spying and operations that were specifically targeting U.S. citizens. He did not cover anything going on in the Middle East, and he covered everything with the reporters before anything was released. He wasn't just dumping everything like previous people had done, where they dumped all information. He selectively chose what to
look at everything. While he did have access to everything, it takes a lot of people a long time to try to draw any actual conclusions. And what you were saying about the spying on the U.S. citizens, they weren't. When you're looking at what the National Security Agency does, they need to look at everything to pick out the little details and the little patterns. If you only have one soda straw looking at one point, you're going to miss everything else. You need to see everything that's there and then filter. They ignore 99.999% of what's
They
there.
identified 0 people.
Yeah, I don't buy that one.
According to the congressional record, they identified 0 people. 0.
No.
Hey, I think let's let you guys go out oval and roll around. All right. Well, thanks. I mean, this is a complicated issue, and in the end, you know, again, it comes down to privacy versus security, right?
In saving lives.
Security.
I'm curious to where you stand.
Myself?
Yeah.
I've researched this, and I couldn't find what the gentleman in the back said with respect to. I have deep concerns about his expertise. I'm very concerned. I don't know whether he should have done what he did or not, but I have deep concerns about his expertise and his ability to blow the whistle. Does he have enough expertise to do that? Educationally, I think that matters a lot. Imagine yourself, you're in some situation in work, you're not sure about, you don't, not much of an expert, you blow the whistle anyway. That creates deep concern as in technical side of things. Okay.
Not as far as right or wrong, just expertise in terms of hacking. His previous post for the CIA had been in embassies, under the cover of diplomatic immunities, that he was pretty much a hacker for the embassies with the surrounding areas. So he would have had actual expertise.
Okay, I'll come to his educational background in a little bit, because I did manage to find that on the web. Okay, a few other. I'm going to skip this one and this one. I want to talk for a moment about. We got time. Don't start opening up sheets of paper. We're going to talk about this issue of career choice and weapons development. Okay, so this is a complicated issue. You know, a number of you will get involved in weapons development. It's a personal decision, but I think you should think about it. So the question is, some people say it's absolutely good to be involved in weapons development, to protect or defend your country, to do humanitarian or peacekeeping missions, to do counterterrorism or the war on drugs, if you support that. But the question you might ask is should you always trust your president or government or democracy? So is it bad? So some people say it's really bad to be involved in weapons development because you're creating products that are beyond your control. In other words, you create a weapon, somebody else uses it for some other reason. So when it comes down to it, the war decisions are out of our control, only in a very broad sense, of a democratic sense, in who we elect, for instance, and then who they pick and employ. The weapons trade decisions are based on profit motives and out of your control. If you think about, I think the U.S. is the largest supplier of weapons in the world, I believe, and so a lot of your products end up going to, let's say, questionable regimes, okay, and that could be a cause for concern. Other people say, well, I'll go work in the weapons industry for some things, but not others. For instance, I won't be involved in weapons of mass destruction, or offensive nuclear war, or indiscriminate killing like landmines, but then you could ask, well, should I be involved in handgun manufacturing? If you look at the number of deaths due to handguns, it's very high, okay? So in the past, there's been a development of this so-called just war theory. This is a social justice perspective with Catholic origins. Their old saying is, if you want peace, work for justice. So they say war is a terrible event, and offensive war is never moral. But even considering national sovereignty, the international community has a moral obligation to intervene on behalf of those groups whose survival is threatened or whose basic human rights are seriously violated. So when do we step in and help each other out? These are extremely complicated questions. So some elements of the just war theory is that defense of your country is not only a right, but a duty. Defense for it to be licit, must use force that corresponds to certain conditions. For instance, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. All other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. There must be serious prospects for success. The use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. So there's questions. Is the U.S., for instance, always adhered to a just war doctrine? Mexican-American War. I don't know if you know the history, but I think most people agree, no, we didn't achieve it there. It was half their land of the country after invading Mexico City. That was just pure expansionism. Was World War II just? A lot of Americans say, well, absolutely yes. But there's a small percentage of people that are not comfortable with the dropping of the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where literally hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed. Okay, that's a complicated issue. I mean, that's an issue for argument outside of class. So you have to, the right to self-defense has to respect the traditional limits of necessity and proportionality. Okay? In other words, you don't respond with much, much, much greater force. Civilians and non-combatants must always be protected. So during the war, you have to act ethically, no atrocities. So Vietnam, of course, we've got some problems there with the U.S. in my life. World War II, so people argue about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they also argue about Dresden and what the Allies did to Dresden. Okay? Next, engaging in a preventive war without clear proof that an attack is imminent cannot fail to raise serious moral and juridical questions. Example, Iraq, another controversial war in the United States. Okay? There's many people feel we should not have gone to war in Iraq. Okay? And others are all for it. All right? So, making contributions to defense of a country is an authentic contribution to peace. Yes, engineers. So that can be an authentic contribution to peace, and a very positive one. Especially when it comes, for instance, to terrorism. But it's controversial there too. Look at Obama's program on drones. Okay, that's pretty controversial amongst Americans. Whether he should be doing the drone attacks. He went on the TV and gave this long explanation of why he's decided to do this, and it's going on. Of course, the U.S. is hated around the world, a number of countries, for that policy. Okay? And not all Americans support that policy. Other Americans do support the policy. It's a very complicated issue. So, some cases. I don't have time to do these. These are great cases. They're from your book. I talk about various employment issues and how it feels to be employed in doing defense. I would say that there's some percentage of people in this class that have grave concerns about being involved in the defense industry, and others that it's fine, couldn't care less. I understand that. That, again, is a personal decision. But I think you should go into it with your eyes wide open about what it is you're getting involved in and doing, and dedicating your life to it. Okay? You could have strong arguments that this is the right thing to commit my life to. I understand that. I've had friends who do that. It's no problem. And then you could have strong arguments the other way too. And sometimes it's hard. These kind of discussions can get really quite emotional. Because of the concerns for, essentially a lot of it comes down to collateral damage. There's very few people would argue that the U.S., for instance, doesn't have a right to defend itself from invasion, and that it would be good to help the U.S. do that. That's not the hard case. The hard case is, some of the terrorism issues, some of the, like Syria, should we go into Syria? What to do about ISIS? What to do, should we have gone into Iraq? And so on and so forth, okay? Those really are complicated issues, okay? What I like is, the only thing I would hope for all of you is that you're not afraid to talk about it. Because a lot of times engineers sort of keep their mouths shut. And, when you gain an ability and insight from working in the defense industry, the into the technology and the technology war, you gain a certain type of professional ability to argue your case, okay? And say what's right and what's wrong. I think engineers too often don't speak up, and say how they feel about things. There's nothing wrong with doing that at all. I'd encourage you to do it. So I'm going to skip over the cases and go right to my attendance question. Our buddy Edward. So Edward Snowden, who is called a computer specialist, he finished high school via a GED, did not attend college, did some work on an online master's degree, and that's it. Okay? So, he did not go to college. Think about it. This guy is a self-taught computer person. Okay? I don't have anything against that, because, you can think of people that haven't finished their degrees that have been very successful, like but I would question his expertise as others did in this class. So all I want to know is, did he do the right thing in whistleblowing on top U.S. and British surveillance? Answer yes or no. Veronica will count up the number of yeses, the number of no's, and we'll let you know that next class period. Anybody that doesn't have a team, come on down front, and we'll get you on a team.